Good morning, everybody. I'm Magdalene from ITIS Capital, and I welcome you all to our second quarter investor call 2021. Thanks for taking the time to be a part of the call. I hope you all are doing well and safe. So before we move into the major part of the call, I'd like to keep all my participants informed that all the participants will be in listen-only mode. And after the presentations, we'll have the Q&A session. So our focus today, as we finish the June quarter 2021, we see that there is optimism abound from an investing standpoint, and rightly so, as this is the first time in the last 12 years that the corporate and government balance sheets are healthy. From here on, I request our founder and fund manager, Naveen Chandramohan, explain this to us with a brief presentation. And if any of you have a question after this brief presentation, you can feel free to type out your questions. Over to Naveen.
Thanks, Magdalene. So just as a housekeeping issue, before we start the call, you can always, during the call, use the Q&A chat session to ask your questions. We'll ensure that as many questions are answered at the end of the call. And if we are not able to answer any of the questions, we'll get back to you on a one-on-one basis post the call. So before we start the call, firstly, I wanted to thank you for taking the time out to be doing this. Obviously, as we are recovering well, I hope you and your family are all well. And hopefully we've seen the worst of things to have come. So I always like to start our call giving a recap of how we ended our previous call. It gives us a perspective of what we had spoken about, especially for those who were not able to make it to our prior call. Right, so we concluded our March 21 call 3 months back with the following. Right, we said growth is coming back across the board. In many cases, due to supply constraints, and we also see early signs of demand picking up. Our focus has and will continue to be to stick to companies showing a free cash flow growth in our portfolio. That's the essence of how we manage risk. Interest rates continue to remain low, and we do not see that environment changing. And we left you with a sobering thought saying that 1 crore investors in Bitcoin as of March 21 versus 2.2 crore investors in MFs. Bitcoin having a 4-year history, and in India specifically, and mutual funds having more of, let's say, 25-year history from a private market perspective, and if you go back much longer, right? Kind of a sobering thought around where investors want to park their money in order to make quick gains, or however you call it. Coming back into June 21, right? Where do we stand as we speak? So obviously we've had a strong outperformance since inception as a fund. So the table here breaks down our yearly returns on a calendar year basis, meaning from Jan to Dec of each year. And this year we've had a good year so far. We've again beaten the index. That's been a consistent phenomenon around how we managed risk. And this has been due to a conscious and consistent focus on the downside as far as how we construct portfolios. One question that we've been asked constantly, I thought it makes sense to address it, is why is your benchmark Nifty 50 when you run a multi-cap focused fund? So there are 2 reasons for this, right? I always ask an investor very simply, on any given day, do you know what is the Nifty mid-cap level or what is the Nifty small-cap level? Most of us don't know, right? Our easiest parameters that we track is Nifty or Sensex. So it's much easier for an investor to go back to see what is the so-called benchmark of India, which happens to be Nifty as far as I'm concerned. And basically to say that when we started the fund, we were going to benchmark it off this particular index. More importantly, why it's relevant for us is over the last 4.5 years since we started the fund, whether we like it or not, Nifty 50 has been the best performing index. You can take mid cap, you can take small cap, you can take 200, you can take what you want. But Nifty 50 has been the best performing index. So while in the last, 9 to 12 months, small cap would have outperformed Nifty 50. If you look at it over a longer time frame, Nifty 50 has clearly beaten all of these indexes. So as a fund, we wanted to take the best performing index and say, are we doing better than that or not, right? And so far, the answer has been yes. And we would continue to benchmark ourselves this way as we speak. Now, going back to our performance since inception, again, it's been fairly healthy. The fund has returned a 25.2% CAGR, as against Nifty generating around 15.61% over the same time period. Now, when we started the fund, right, we set ourselves a threshold of how we should measure ourselves. We said over every 5-year time frames, we should be continuing to beat our benchmark by roughly around 6 to 7%. We are at around 4.5 years at the moment. So far, we are well and truly done that. And the expectation is over the next 3 to 4, 5-year cycles, we continue to do the same, sticking to our philosophy. It's important for investors to understand what does downside protection even mean, right? So what we've done here is to basically take quarterly returns of the Nifty since inception. So what that means is Jan to March 2017, all the way to March to June 2021, right? So roughly there are around 4.5 years multiplied by 3. So roughly around 15 quarters. Each quarter, when Nifty is up, we call it an up market. And each quarter, the Nifty is down, we call it a down market. So what we say is, how is ITIS performing both during up and down markets? So what would stand out, as you can see, is both during up and down markets, we have done better than the index consistently, right? So our fund has outperformed Nifty on 18 out of 14 quarters since inception, where the benchmark return was positive, right? And our fund has outperformed Nifty on 3 out of the 4 quarters when the benchmark return was negative. And the outperformance during negative periods is vastly, significantly higher than during positive periods. So what this means is effectively what I call downside protection. Our fund is not that fund that you investors come in to maximize their returns every year. I wish there is a fund like that, but there isn't. History will tell you that there isn't. But our fund is that fund which aims to keep the investor invested in the markets for long periods of time. And the way we manage to do that is to ensure we focus on downside, because end of the day, what happens during down markets is most people tend to panic. So if you can hold your investors during that period, as long as your philosophy is sound, whether you like it or not, you will continue to compound capital. So that's been our primary focus, and I thought it makes sense to spend some time explaining that. What did we do in the last quarter, right? I've always maintained that we are not buy, hold, and forget investors. The world evolves, so does our thought process, and we have to see whether we made some mistakes or some of the portfolio companies that we own that are doing extremely well. Is there an opportunity cost to continue to hold them, right? So there are some portfolios, legacy portfolios specifically, which owned Sun TV and MCX, and we got out of both in the quarter. Now, just a very brief insight, and I'll cover that at greater length, why we did with some data as well. So Sun TV sales was predominantly driven by the decline in ad spends and traditional media moving to OTT. It's a phenomenon that we've seen in the last 1.5 years. Now, OTT is extremely a price competitive industry today, right? Especially in India. You drop the price in order to acquire more customers. And Sun TV also had their own OTT platform called Sun Next, which was doing well, but the growth in the Sun Next platform was low to mid single digits, even in this environment. So in the current environment, where use of traditional media in terms of ad spends is coming down, a lot of FMCG companies are reconsidering where they want to drive their ad spends, be it as a mix of digital as well as traditional media. And the OTT platform being extremely competitive, we felt that it doesn't make sense to own Sun TV anymore, and we completely got out of it. It was a small position, but it is completely out. Second is MCX, which I'll cover in further detail, but more so just from a hypothesis perspective, right? If you look at every business in its life cycle, they go through tailwinds in its evolution, and exchanges are one such businesses which have had the best of times in the last 2 years, right? You look at, let's say, listed index like a BSE or an unlisted index like an NSE, or an electricity or power exchange like IEX, or a commodity exchange like MCX. Pretty much everyone has had massive tailwinds and growth in the last 1.5 years on the account of lockdown and increased transactions coming through. Now, through all of this, right, one would expect increased account opening, increased number of transactions, and more importantly, underlying what you're trading, which is the commodities, be it gold or copper or oil, massively going up, which means you would expect both speculators as well as FIIs as well as hedging community to be a lot more active, right? In the last 2 years, what we noticed with MCX is the volumes have dried up. I wouldn't, so dried up is a relative word. The volumes have not gone up. And I'll show you some data around it later in our presentation. It's kind of been stagnant. And this we do not believe is a good trend for the business. And we felt that there was a big opportunity cost in continuing to hold the business, which made us exit the business. And again, while all of this hypothesis, I'll just translate that into some numbers such that you have a better perspective of how we thought through this investment. From a portfolio construct perspective, right? So people who attended our March quarter call are aware that we were reducing our private sector lenders in the book, where we completely exited Axis Bank. So if you've been following the fund since inception, the March to June 2020 quarter, which is basically post the first lockdown, we took a counter stance of increasing financials significantly in the book. That thesis played out well, and most of the returns got front-ended. And we felt that we wanted to be reducing leverage in the book, irrespective of where that leverage is coming from, right? So effectively, a lot of that cash was getting deployed into non-lending financials, which I'll again talk you through why and what was our thought process around this. And one thing that I've always believed as a portfolio manager, right? I think there are 5 important aspects that a portfolio manager is supposed to do. But unfortunately, we get judged on only one, which according to me is the simplest. The first layer is what I call stock selection. This is the simplest thing for being a portfolio manager, right? And unfortunately, every investor looks at the portfolio and says, I own these stocks too. But this is the most fundamental and elementary part. To be honest, I would put my hand up and say it doesn't even matter, right? There are 4 layers above this that actually drive your returns, which very few people pay attention to. The second important thing, and I'm talking about each of this in order of difficulty as well. So when I say step 1, which is security selection, according to me, it's the easiest. Step 2 is position sizing. What that means is once I like a certain security or a hypothesis, how do I size that exposure? Third is position increasing. Very few people even look at this, right? If a thesis is playing out well, how do I increase my position size in this? Most people don't do it. It's very hard to do, right? It's like people like to buy when it falls. People don't like to add when it is doing well. Fourth is exit, right? I've always believed that buy, hold, and forget thesis really doesn't work in the market. People who have done it in the 90s and 2000s talk about examples like HDFC Bank and Asian Paints. They are good examples with the benefit of history. Capital markets have evolved since. Today is not a market where you can go and find your next HDFC Bank. It's nice on paper, but those are nice stories to narrate if you want to be selling something. It's not the way the market actually works, right? So exit is a very, very important aspect of how you think about opportunity cost. And fifth and most important, which nobody emphasizes on, and is the hardest thing to do, is communication. Because end of the day, I think when the market is up, everyone is okay, they're happy, the returns are there, right? But when the market is down, that's when investors are panicking. They look up to the manager to communicate better, and more often than not, it reverses. The manager stops to communicate because there is panic all around, right? Accountability drops. And I think all 5 put together is how a portfolio manager should be judged, or at least that's how we evaluate ourselves as a fund manager. Now, coming back to the portfolio health, again, I want to spend some time on this, right? So we finished the March quarter earnings roughly around a month back, right? So if we look at FY20 to FY21, right? If we look at our portfolio specifically, the portfolio health that Magdalene spoke about at its very best is because of the free cash flow growth but going by about 147%, right? Now, the ROC of our portfolio is around 23%. The gross profit margin is around 55%. Why does gross profit margin matter? Because it basically tells you for 1 rupee of revenue, how much of it is actually getting converted into potential getting converted into possibility post raw material cost. What is my gross profit? After that, you have depreciation, amortization, interest expense, whatever, right? Salaries. And that translates into your bottom line and cash flow over time. So the reason why I want to spend some time on this is because obviously there is a feeling in the market that we are at all-time highs, and every time the market goes to an all-time high, people get concerned. The beauty of us as investors is when the market falls, we get concerned. When the market goes up, also we get concerned. So we are paranoid. We can't change that as humans. But so the only thing that we have to do is resort to numbers to see, do we have any margin of safety, or are we basically taking on more risk than we need to in any particular market? So it's important to realize when the free cash flow growth grows in our portfolio by 148%. If you look at our performance in the last same period, right, it's been around 72% from a price change perspective. So what that means is the fundamentals of the portfolio has gone up almost 2x versus the actual price change. This is what I call margin of safety as far as our portfolio is concerned. I'll repeat, this is not a market, this is our portfolio. So I'm not commenting about the market here, right? I'm commenting about margin of safety on our portfolio, which according to me is important to decide whether we should be, how should we be evaluating risk in our portfolio at any point of time, right? So if I go over, these are all the companies that, when I say our portfolio, these are all the companies that we own. Some of these may not be in your portfolio. It really depends on when an investor came in. If it is marginal, some of these, the exposure sizes could be different, which again, I'll talk you through as to why, right? So what I have done here is basically the team has put together all our portfolio companies, each of the portfolio companies' return on capital, gross profit margin, how the quarterly growth has been, both from a revenue as well as a PAT perspective. Because all of this gives a sense to the investor around how the actual portfolio quality and health is, right? Price is a consequence. Health is what we can measure. Price is beyond our control. Health is in our control, right? So if you look at it, one interesting trend you will see is while the revenue growth has only been roughly around 13 to 15%, right? I say only because of the way the market is going, but 13 to 15% is a fairly strong and robust revenue growth. The bottom line growth, right, is roughly around 55%. And the reason that's a lot more robust is two things have happened. A, companies have managed their working capital a lot better, right? In terms of, if you look at it, there's been huge delevering of corporate balance sheets. Working capital cycles have reduced drastically because of supply distortions. And all of this has resulted in better PAT margin because of expense management, consolidation across sectors, and free cash flow generation. So today, management is also speaking all the good stuff. So it's really important to identify which are the so-called good companies which have a headway, which have room for growth, versus those companies which are more of cyclicals, the way we see it. So this is where I want to spend some time, right? Because today, when a new investor is deploying cash, the important thing to address is how do we deploy the cash? So the first thing that I will keep reiterating is we do not believe in model portfolios. So we do not just invest because cash is available, right? We would be slow to deploy capital in these markets. And what does that mean? I'll again take an example. So our exposure of companies would be slightly different across different portfolios depending on when they came in, but it would normalize over time. So how do we size our investments? So let's take an example, right? Let's take the example of Syngene, which is there across all our portfolios today. If an investor was an early investor, so we bought Syngene early 2018, right? Way before COVID-19 or lockdowns or pharma became the so-called popular theme. And many investors would find, the original investors would find Syngene at an exposure of double digits today because of the gains that the company has generated from a price move perspective over the last 3 years. Now, our broad thesis on this company remains unchanged, right? However, for investors coming in today, the exposure in the same company would only be 5 to 6%. Now, why this difference? Specifically with this company, I would want to see the company increasing its fixed asset turns. What that means is, over the last 3 years, the company has been deploying 2,200 crores roughly of new assets in terms of capex expansion funded through free cash flows. Now, these new assets need to actually get converted into sales, which is 1 to 2 year process. And that turns is what you call the efficiency of this company. Roughly, fixed asset turns of Syngene historically has been around 3.2 to 3.3. Today, it is around 1.8. Why that drop? Because capex has increased. Now, as the demand cycle has gone up, as the turns come into the market, you would see this 1.2, 1.8 go back to 3.3, which will translate into top line and which will go into free cash flows, right? So what you call as your multiple today, while it might look inflated, technically, as things improve, it will normalize itself. So here again, looking at PE as a standalone is not a good idea unless and until you understand the business model. So why a lower exposure today is because I would want to see execution. So this is what I call execution monitoring of a portfolio. Just because we like a particular stock doesn't mean that we forget about it. We need to be monitoring this in order to ensure this fixed asset turns is actually increasing. And if not, why not? Is it more of a structural worry? And that means we need to change our view. Or at that point of time, as it executes, as things pan out, would we actually then increase the exposure at that point of time? So, end of the day, investing is not around saying, I like a stocks, let's buy and everything will work out. No, investing is about having a thesis, ensuring that thesis pans out in terms of numbers, monitoring it, and then figuring out if the monitoring is not working out, is it more of a short-term trend or is it something that we need to worry about? So we would take our time in order to normalize these exposures over time. And this is how we would think about the exposure normalizing. So again, to spend some time on ITIS positioning today, right? So if you look at it, so we've always run a multi-cap focused fund. Our large cap exposure now is around 22%. Small cap has increased to now 33%. Most of that increase is not because of additions, but more so because of gains. And here again on the left, I've classified where our exposures are from a sector perspective, right? And obviously, I would like each investor to look at this from the way we think rather than to bucket everything under financials and say our financial exposure is high. I don't think risk should be thought of that way. To us, we've been doing a lot of work in rebalancing our financial exposure. We've cut down our banking exposure significantly. Our non-banking exposure, non-lending financial exposure has gone up as well, and I'll explain why that's the case. And continued, the last bucket we've always had a significant exposure in pharma. And I think from our perspective, large cap pharma is extremely risky. Mid and small cap pharma actually is less risky. It's counterintuitive, but understanding the business models of each of those companies, and I can spend some time later if any of you have a question why I make such a statement. So the important question to ask is why this non-lending financials increase, right? Where is it actually increasing due to, and why are we increasing this? So the first increase was in a company that we did, let's see, 3 to 4 months back. We started adding, we've been increasing our exposure, called UTI AMC, right? Now, AMC business is actually very simple. You have two levers, revenues, which are basically linked to your AUM growth, and expenses, which you want to keep cutting down. Now, UTI AMC has clearly had legacy issues, right? It's a PSU. It has a PSU connotation to it. So people obviously don't like it. I don't think that's going to change in the next few years. However, inherently, when you study the business, there's a lot that's happening on the ground that is changing. 3.5 years back, they changed their CIO to a fairly well-respected gentleman, Vetri Subramaniam. I think most people in the industry would be aware of his track record and what he's built, and he's translated the Invesco process into UTI. To me, a mutual fund industry is an access product. It's never a return product. I think people always confuse the two. A mutual fund is not supposed to give you excess returns. It's supposed to give you index plus returns. It is meant for people to get access into the product. It's not being sold that way, but it is what it is. So it is predominantly going to get governed by how well you distribute your AMC. And UTI AMC, if you had checked 3 years back in any of the bank and wealth counters, they were not empaneled for obvious legacy reasons. And that has changed in the last 3 years through consistent performance as well as very consistent portfolio positioning, right? And you can see this daily AUM chart over the last 1.5 years as to where things are. Now they've crossed 2 lakh crores in AUM as well. Now, if you go slightly more granular, right, where we've broken down the monthly AUM of equities and debt. Obviously, the 58.79% growth in equities is a contribution of both mark-to-market gains as well as equity inflows. The debt, they were coming off a crisis back in 2018, and they are slowly recovering from there as well, right? So the AUM growth is coming from a healthy mix of equity and debt. Now, one thing to understand is an equity, an AMC always has a lag in terms of AUM growth and revenues. AUM growth happens first, revenues gets translated 3 to 6 months once it normalizes, because that's how you charge. So you're seeing a very steady growth in terms of revenues as well as the management fees continues to pick up. So end of the day, the revenue levers of the AMC seems to be going through an inflection point as far as we look at it. The second thing is on the cost lever, right? Now, the important thing from a PSU is they are dealing with VRS issues. They've been dealing with it since 2002. They're taking a concerted effort to cut this. Now, how do I measure cost, or how do we measure cost internally as a team? HDFC AMC is best in class. There's no doubt about it. They have their own issues too, but from a cost perspective, it's at 12 bips of AUM. UTI AMC 1.5 years, one year back was roughly around 36 bips of AUM from cost, highest in the industry in the listed space. Today it's at 32, right? So if their cost base comes down from 32 to 28 over the next 1.5 years, that goes straight into the bottom line. So there is a very big re-rating possibility over the next 2 to 3 years if these trends continue. Now, equity investing is never one way. So there are risks to this business too, right? If India goes through a deflationary environment where this liquidity is high, but we don't get growth, maybe equity inflows stop. So all of this thesis needs to get reevaluated. But as we speak, what we see is if our thesis goes wrong, there's not much to lose. But if our thesis is right, I think there is a significant compounding story ahead of us. So that's one of our new investments that we made recently. Next is to talk about a slightly different business called IEX, right? So IEX is it's an energy exchange where power contracts are traded on the exchange from a short-term perspective. So here again, IEX listed back in 2017. Obviously, it didn't do very well because the listing was very high from earnings perspective. So roughly between 18, so we were following the business because it was very interesting monopolistic business. We didn't make any investments in it roughly until March 2020. March 2020, we saw a very interesting trend, right? Post the lockdown, one would have assumed industry shut down, power transactions go down drastically. That didn't happen. Actually, power transactions went up on a monthly basis. And when we looked at the data, right, and all of this data is proprietary to us, where we use a product where we scout through almost 1 million data points on the internet. It's available, but it's just difficult to consume and analyze. So we use a proprietary model to be doing all of this. And most of the data is from the exchange. So it's not like we are making up the data. It's all available on the exchange. It's just difficult to garner and get. You see that the actual volume on the exchange began to go up. And at that point of time, if we had used the traditional metrics of PE, which people love to use, right? I'm not saying PE is wrong, but people need to understand that PE is backward looking. Growth is forward looking. One needs to marry the two in order to say, when am I going to get comfortable paying up for a business, right? And I'll talk you through when we bought it and how it's done and why we continue to buy it today. So the volumes in the exchange continue to go up, right? It's roughly up around 38% on a year-on-year basis. It's robust today. Now, this is, so there are two aspects of how the volume translates into revenues. So every contract that trades on the exchange, basically it's 2 plus 2 paisa from a contract perspective. So there are two things that you need to take look at. One is what is the clearing price of the contract, and second is the volume. When both increase, obviously you're going to make more money as an exchange. And what we have plotted over the last year and a half is how this revenue has actually gone up and how it's been trending up. Now, when we bought IEX roughly around April 2020, for the first time, the PE was at 47. If anyone had looked at a PE and said exchanges, global exchanges, BSE trades at a PE of roughly around 24, but obviously doesn't have much growth. NSE in the unlisted market is around 34. Global exchanges trade around 30 to 35. So we were buying it at 47, right? It is not cheap. Today, the PE is still high, it's at 55. But what happens through this is you actually get a revenue growth of almost 40%, which goes straight into the bottom line. That's the important business of an exchange. When you don't have debt and your costs don't increase for scaling up your business, because you already put all your capital, be it in the form of software or people costs, you have huge operating leverage. And suddenly, the business looks a lot more robust. So I always say this, buying companies only on PE is like doing a health check at the end of the year and eating salad for the next 30 days, right? You miss out on the bigger picture, and that's not how investing is always meant to be. So I'm not saying PE is irrelevant, but at the same time, it needs to get looked into alongside growth of the business around how you see it going forward as well, right? And why are we still buying it today? I mean, the price has doubled. It's doing well. Why are we still buying it today? And we are there are risks again. So just because we buy a business doesn't mean that it has to go up, right? Market doesn't care whether we want to own a business or not. The reason we are buying it today is because it's monopolistic. 6% of the total power in India is on the exchange. There are regulatory risks around this that we will continue to monitor. Competition can come in this kind of a market because there is no second player. And we'll have to monitor all of this to figure out when we continue to ramp up or if we have to downsize our exposure. Now, the important thing is, why did we sell MCX, right? Because one could look at MCX as very, very similar characteristics to IEX from a story perspective. See, the beauty of investing is once you start putting stories, your mind basically looks at it saying that it's perfect. It's monopolistic. 96% of the commodity volume in India goes through MCX, right? Free cash flow generating, has the same characteristics of IEX, but at the same time, we sold MCX and we are increasing IEX. Why? Right? So, like I said in the beginning, every business goes through what I call an inflection point. And exchanges went through an inflection point. One of the big misses that I think we did, and I'll cover that later, is not buying CDSL. But I guess we have to learn and move on to another day, right? MCX was a big, big beneficiary of the lockdown. However, when you look at the turnover volume over the last 1 year, the same period that I showed you in terms of IEX, MCX has not grown. And do realize turnover is a consequence of the number of contracts multiplied by price. Each of the commodities on the exchange, right, has gone up 50%. Be it not so much gold, but be it oil or copper or any of the metals, right? So the price has moved up by 50%, but the turnover is flat. What does that tell you? The number of contracts have actually dropped, right? In the top two commodities, when you break it down on the exchange, be it natural gas and gold, it's not moved a lot. It's been volatile, especially natural gas and yellow, but the volume has not changed. So the third thing that we measure is the number of new accounts that are opening up on the exchange. Again, that is unchanged. All this basically is telling us the best time for the business. At that point of time, if you're not able to show revenue growth, there's fundamentally something flawed, the way we see it. And according to us, we have an opportunity cost in owning that business. see, the price moving up or down is not under our control, but when the fundamentals are not reflecting your thesis, it's really important to figure out why do you still want to be owning the business. For us, the case is no longer there and we are out of MCX as we speak. Very quickly, I just want to spend some time on the case for private capex today. So there's this interesting story going on in the market. Cyclicals have done really well. They'll continue to do well, be it steel or sugar or metals or infrastructure. Why? Right? Why this change in dynamics? So, and we don't own much in cyclicals. If you look at our portfolio, it's completely growth oriented. There are not too many cyclicals in place. So I'll explain to you the numbers that we are seeing on the ground as to why this case is being made, something that we'll monitor, but at the same time, unless and until it's accompanied by actual cash flow growth, I don't think we're going to change our mind very fast around this. So if you look at between March 19 to March 21, right, the bank's CASA has almost jumped 10.2 trillion in a year, when actually India's economy is contracted measured by GDP. Now, banks are sitting on an unprecedented almost 17.6 trillion of excess SLR, right? So in the form of liquidity. And this has obviously jumped a lot in the last 2 years through COVID. And obviously, we've heard this time and time again. What is the excess ample liquidity in the system? And you can see this in this graph as well. As the call money rates have moved from 6.6 2 years back to almost 3.2 today. Now, what the thesis is around why this case for private capex is the surplus money that is sitting in the system is getting channelized from the government's balance sheet into the economy through the center and state. So if you look at the market borrowings roughly, the dark blue is talking about the center borrowing and the light blue is talking about the state borrowing. The 17.5 trillion that we spoke about is actually gone. The excess SLR is pretty much going in terms of private and public capex coming through both from the center and state, right? So this has to come back into the economy and this has to result in increased lending. So that's the thesis. However, we would want to wait for certain numbers to pan out before we basically say, and if the balance sheets of these companies are increasing and it translates into cash flows, we might look at it. But till then, we would be careful around painting stories and translating that into an investment. That's not how we look at risk management. Final thoughts before we go into Q&A, right? I think it's very clear that the portfolio is healthiest in terms of growth since the inception of the fund. The way we measure healthy is how well, so the way you measure healthy is how your weight is moving on a year-on-year basis. And as long as it's reducing and your BMI is reducing alongside, you are healthy. Similarly for us, the way we measure healthy from a portfolio perspective is how is the cash flow growing on a year-on-year basis versus how is the price of the portfolio changing on a year-on-year basis. Personally, I believe there is still valuation comfort in our portfolio. Clearly, in the market, there are areas of froth which we need to be concerned about and cautious about. I think the flows into equities, whether we like it or not, is going to continue to stay strong. And this is again on the basis of multiple conversations that we do with our partners and clients. I think one thing that I will go and say is 2 years hence, we will look back on March 2020 as one of the biggest tailwinds in terms of financialization of India. I think we're seeing that in terms of a trend beginning today. There will be volatility. I think that's par for the course in equities. That's something you can't avoid. One has to live through it. But at the same time, I think this is the biggest tailwind for equity markets as far as India is concerned. So on that note, we'll open up the floor for questions.
Thank you, Naveen, for the update. Participants who have questions can feel free to type in their questions in the Q&A button. The identity of the investors is protected as the Q&A will only be available to panelists. Participants, you can now type in your questions. Naveen, I have a question. So, from one of the panelists, I have invested in the beginning of 2008, a few months before the fall. How do you see the market now and then?
Could you repeat that? I've invested in the markets in 2008?
A few months before the fall. How do you see the market now and then?
So I think they're two very different markets back then, right? I think in 2008, if you look back, huge number of NFOs were actually being issued mostly in the infrastructure space. Infrastructure was looked at as a story. Again, it's a typical example of price leading stories. Your biggest outperformance in the market was Reliance Power, right? GMR, GVK. All of the companies, when you study the balance sheet, was functioning on almost 5x or 6x debt to EBITDA. Borrowing at interest rates at that time in India was roughly around, the base FD rate was around 10.5, 11%. And these balance sheets where the cost of capital was around 13.5%. And the equity markets were still funding these businesses because the price was going up, right? I think we are in a very, very different market here. We can fall, but at the same time, the dynamics of where the leverage was back then versus where leverage is today are completely different, right? The concern that I have that I would want to monitor is what is the retail leverage in the system today. I think that's increasing, and that's never a sign. It's never a good sign because as retail leverage picks up, volatility will pick up. That doesn't mean I always say this in history, in the last 100 years, in the next 100 years, no one is going to go bankrupt if they don't have debt, right? Bankruptcy, the feature of bankruptcy only comes in when you have debt. And today, corporate India and the government balance sheet is the least levered in the last 12 years. So I think from a structural perspective, we are healthy. From a short-term perspective, volatility will come in, right? I don't think you can run away from that. So I think 2008 and 2021 are very different markets. Maybe in the next 2 to 3 years, we go into euphoria and we'll see how things pan out. But I don't think today there is cause for concern as we speak in India.
Thank you, Naveen. There is one more question asking about the portfolio. How does Lupin figure in the portfolio? Is it part of your legacy holding?
Correct. So Lupin is one of the stocks in some of the old portfolios. It's a small exposure. And we don't own Lupin. We've not added Lupin in any of the portfolios in the last 9 months. Again, we might look at exiting it. It depends on how some of the biosimilars that Lupin produces, especially from its JV with Japan, pans out. Unless and until the data shows an improved recovery in the sales cycle and the revenue cycle, there's still margin pressure on many of their products. If that doesn't change, we might exit it in the legacy portfolios as well.
Thank you, Naveen. There is one more question. Do you worry that interest rates will result in withdrawal of FIIs from the Indian market?
See, I think one thing that, at least the way I think about risk is we can control only what we can control, right? In the sense, what FIIs do is not something we can have a view on, but is not something that we have a control on. So obviously, if interest rates increase, right, FIIs might pull out. And however, you cannot front run that. What you can do is minimize the risk when such an event happens. And how do you do that? By owning companies which are growing. Because when things fall, everything is going to fall. But when things recover, these companies which are structurally strong will recover faster, right? So rather than worrying about interest rates, so the beauty of interest rate prediction, right? I don't understand how analysts sitting in India can even have a view on US interest rates. So when I was in Hong Kong, I was a fund manager there managing Indian capital. If you look back at the US so-called expert opinion on market interest rates, in 2013, we first started worrying about interest rate increase. We said it's going to collapse, QE2 came. In 2015, we basically worried about yuan devaluation. We said markets are going to collapse. In 2018, we again had a case of interest rates again going up, right? Not far ago, 3 months back, we again had a case of interest rates going up because inflation was picking up, right? Home prices were going up in the US, fuel and food prices were going up in the US, growth stocks were getting hammered. And today, where is 10-year US? It's at its lowest ever, 1.3%. So I think if you ever go into the business of predicting macro, I think we'll all be bankrupt. What we are in the business of is to have a view and be amenable to the fact that that's beyond our control. What we are in control of is to focus on the health of the cash flows of the companies that we invest in from a micro perspective. And as long as the focus is there, and in terms of evaluating where the froth is, I think we'll do fine in the medium to long term. So, do I worry about increase in interest rates? To be honest, I don't worry about it. Can it happen? I think it can happen. And technically, one thing that I will tell you even today, when interest rates increase, because in the next 2 years it will, the narrative of the market will completely change. Because when inflation hits, the best asset class to own is again equities, right? So we will find another new thing to worry about at that point of time. But to be honest, that's the nature of equity investing. I don't think we can ever take worries and fear out of equity investing.
Thank you, Naveen, for it. Naveen, I have a last question. Would you look at Tata Motors considering your focus on EVs?
So we've looked, Tata Motors was a typical turnaround business. We studied Tata Motors at deep length when they were going through a JLR restructuring. So Tata Motors went through the issues of Tata Motors where whenever India focused, it was predominantly their acquisition in JLR that kept deteriorating their balance sheet massively because most of that was funded on debt. Right? So once JLR started recovering, and they started rationalizing and pruning costs, it was a recovery story. Again, the problem of auto is you have a business which is structurally cyclical in nature, right? Because auto is always a discretionary spend. It's never a non-discretionary spend. I might cut it anytime I have trouble, right? So it's important to understand that auto is always cyclical. If you were comfortable playing turnarounds, we looked at it, we were not comfortable because of the debt on the balance sheet. It's done phenomenally well. So today the balance sheet looks a lot healthier than 1.5 years back. To focus on EVs, right? Again, it's a 5-10 year thesis. It could very well happen. It's a beautiful story panning out. For us, we are never story investors. I think unless and until it gets translated into fundamentals and the fundamentals get translated into cash flow growth, and we get it at a right valuation, we are not looking at it. So I wouldn't say that it's a bad business, but at the same time, if you look at the consistent ROC that the business produces, it's always been lower than the cost of capital, right? From a cyclical point of view, there are always turnaround periods where its ROC increases the cost of over the cost of capital, but it's never structural in nature. So we wouldn't own Tata Motors in our portfolio. Doesn't mean an investor shouldn't, right? It just doesn't fit our philosophy and framework around how we evaluate companies today.
Thank you, Naveen. That's about the further question. Over to you, Maggie.
Okay, so there's another question. How do you see the impact of rising RM costs in the portfolio?
So, see, I think it's a valid concern, right? I mean, one thing that we have maintained consistently is I think FMCG margins are going to come under pressure predominantly because of this. We spoke about this when P&G globally actually increased the price of diapers for the first time in 12 years, globally. I'm not talking about in India, but globally, right? So there is certainly margin pressure. Companies are going to increase the price. You don't have a way around this. It's still too early, right? Because what you're seeing in the March quarter earnings, you're already seeing a part of that. EBITDA margins have compressed, but some part of that compression has been benefited because of turnover top line growth. I think if commodity prices continue to rise, you'll see two things happening. Businesses that are gaining market share and that are strong will increase the price. Businesses that are small and do not have much market share, you can say proxy unorganized, are going to go out of business. So it's really important in this kind of a market that you own businesses that have the ability to manage price, have kind of a good, strong B2B connect, if it's a B2B business or a B2C where they can increase the price. And I think over the next few quarters, whether we like it or not, we are going to see some amount of EBITDA margins contraction in many of these businesses. Hence, the fact of owning these high quality businesses at the right price, which becomes even more important in this kind of a market.
Sure, Naveen, thanks for that. One last question. Any thoughts on cryptocurrency or BTS?
So, okay, cryptocurrency or Bitcoin, see, I think we spoke about this in the March earnings, in the March quarter as well. There is immense amount of interest because price goes up, right? Every time price goes up, the mind always moves to the fact that I can make quick money. I think there are two ways to look at it. If you want to allocate 1% of your net worth as an option value, where you can say, I'm comfortable with it going to zero, I think you can do it. The only problem that I have with Bitcoin or cryptocurrency is the following, right? If you are a tech geek and if you read all the white papers, be it of Ethereum or Matic or some of the newer coins, and if you understand it, go ahead. Because I have views on some of these currencies. I would not own it. The reason I would not own it is the following. If the genesis of the currency is to so-called provide a replacement to the dollar, the US dollar, you cannot basically price it to the US dollar. The moment you are basically saying, I'm going to price a currency to the very currency that I want to replace, the concept is lost. I think over time, I think the idea of Ethereum or smart contracts is extremely interesting as far as I'm concerned. But the fact of speculation in that space, I'm uncomfortable. However, again, different people have different risk appetites. And I think if one wants to look at it from an option value perspective, one can certainly do it. Would we? The honest answer is no.
Sure, Naveen. Naveen, thank you for that update and the questions that you've answered. Thank you, Naveen and Ajit. I also thank all the participants on the call for taking time to be a part of the call. The recording of this webinar will be sent out once it's made available. Have a nice day and stay safe.
Thank you, everyone.